raised their hand. You got a question? Don Hooper.
What are you going to do about the light rail?
What am I going to do about the light rail? Look, I think that's primarily a local issue.
Well, Senator Hutchinson keeps putting the language back in there and getting the funding, so I need you to stop it.
And Culberson gets it stripped out, literally, and then Hutchinson puts it back in.
Let me tell you an answer I've given all over the state, because there have been folks that have asked me repeatedly, how are you going to bring home the bacon? And I've said, listen, if you're looking for someone that's going to go to Washington and fight to bring home the bacon, I ain't your guy.
That was not my question. I don't want you to bring home the bacon. I want you to stop the light rail.
I am, and what I'm saying is, I think if we're going to have rail here, let the people of Houston decide they want it and pay for it. Why? I mean, look, all over the country, you've got the federal government spending taxpayer money, and that's why we're going broke.
Well, Ted, I'm sorry to tell you, but the federal government's paying for our rail.
I agree. And listen, we need to stop with a $16 trillion national debt. We can't have Washington cuts it. You know, in Washington, the word cut is defined as a slight decrease in the future rate of growth. We can't do that. You know, look, I think an awful lot of light rail projects are just boondoggles that cost billions of dollars and don't get used.
That's right.
And that's why I need to go vote.
And what I'm saying, not only am I agreeing with you, there will be no one in the U.S. Senate, bar none, who is a more relentless, a more vigorous, a more strategic, and I believe more effective advocate of shrinking the size and power of the federal government.
My question is three-pronged in a response that I would like. Often these days it seems as though the oath of office is nothing more than a formality as opposed to actually swearing a sacred oath to protect and defend the nation as well as to serve the people as opposed to telling people how to live. With respect to that and the Constitution, Obama's war on religion vis-a-vis the abortifacients and HHS mandates regarding Catholic institutions having to provide abortion and coverage for their members. I want to know what your position is with respect to how an individual can swear an oath of office, especially at the federal level, that is supposed to defend the Constitution, whereas it contradicts what's actually in the Constitution. And to that, why should somebody, early on in this, why should somebody like Scott Brown from Massachusetts have to introduce legislation to an already layered bureaucracy when we keep hearing about people wanting to return to the fundamentals, the rules of law, or essentially the Constitution?
Look, you put your finger on something that is an enormous challenge. For 3.5 years, Barack Obama has waged war on the Constitution. This has been the most lawless president we've ever seen. Over and over and over again. We have seen this president disregard his oath of office. You talk about religious liberty. Look, the order to Catholic hospitals and charities to cover abortifacients, to cover services that exceed their religious faith. If the federal government can order some to violate their faith, the federal government can order all of us to violate our faith. We're a nation that was founded by people fleeing religious oppression and coming here seeking the freedom to seek God with all of our heart, mind, and soul as best we can. The idea that the federal government would intrude, you know, there was a terrific hearing in Congress where a Catholic Archbishop was testifying about this, and he drew a great analogy. He talked about a kosher deli. And he said, I want you to imagine the federal government decided to promulgate a new law that every deli must sell bacon. And they said, look, pork, it's the other white meat, it's healthy, and we've decided in our enlightened federal government way that more pork eating would be good. And the argument, this Archbishop continued, would be that for some of those kosher delis, they would say, look, it is against our faith to serve bacon. Now the response might be, well wait, there are some Jews who eat pork, and so because some of your faith don't follow that teaching, you have no right to follow that teaching. That's of course one of the arguments that's used by the Obama administration, is because some Catholics don't follow that teaching, no Catholic has a right to follow that teaching. And then the Archbishop said, suppose then a compromise was suggested. You don't have to sell the bacon yourself. You simply have to allow a stand to be set up in the middle of your deli where your meat supplier will give away the bacon for free. And you have to pay for it. That is, of course, exactly the, quote, compromise the Obama administration reached. I'll tell you when this happened, I wrote a long blog talking about how this policy was a trifecta. It embodied, number one, the Obama administration's assault on the Constitution, number two, their contempt for religious liberty, and number three, their constant effort to draw power and control into Washington controlling our lives. We got to get back to the Constitution. There is no imperial presidency in the Constitution, and it ain't right that there are more czars in Washington than there ever were in Russia.
That's right, that's right. I agree with that.
Hopefully you'll be our senator, and hopefully you'll be on the Judiciary Committee, which I hope you shoot for. I want to ask you, as this gentleman said, a two-part question with 4 subparts. I've only 2 questions.
Am I taking the LSAT again?
Will you, if we lose one of our conservative justices, and we have President Obama while you're in the Senate, and he nominates a liberal activist who is otherwise qualified attorney, will you oppose it on the Judiciary Committee, and will you filibuster?
Yes and yes.
Thank you.
And let me elaborate on that a little bit. Listen, judicial activism is an enormous problem. The last 4 decades we have seen activists on the court intruding in area after area of our lives that are properly decided in the legislative sphere and by the Constitution. I began my career as a law clerk for Chief Justice William Rehnquist. He was an extraordinary man. He was a very dear friend and mentor. When he passed away, I had the incredible honor of serving as a pallbearer at the Chief Justice's funeral. The Chief spent 34 years on the Supreme Court fighting against activism, fighting against those that would impose their values and disregard the law. You know, as you know, during my time as Solicitor General, we fought and won some of the biggest fights in the country against activism and defending the Constitution, whether it was the 10 Commandments or the Pledge of Allegiance or the Second Amendment or fighting against the World Court and the United Nations and defending U.S. sovereignty. Just about every one of those decisions would come out different if President Obama is able to